Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of the Cocktail 2021. I am Ms. Frankie Marshall, and I am here with our talk, our seminar called Wine Matters. And I've got a really esteemed panel, a really esteemed couple of owner, operator, former bartenders joining me today. I have from Sydney, Australia, Tim Philips-Johansson. I'm sure you've Googled everybody and looked them up, but just briefly, he's an owner of Bulletin Place and Dead Bringer in Sydney, and we'll talk a little bit more about those bars shortly. Also, I've got Carina Soto from Paris and London, a partner in Quixotic Projects, co-owner of Matters, Candelaria, Hero, and probably a few other things coming up as well. So, as I said, the title of our seminar is called Wine Matters. And this idea came to me, it's been on my mind for a while because I've always wondered, as a wine drinker myself, as someone who goes out and loves to drink wine, why I had such a hard time finding just a decent, and not even great, but a decent glass of wine in a lot of bars, particularly cocktail bars. And I remember it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was in LA and I went to a very famous cocktail bar. And I've been drinking cocktails all day and all I really wanted was a glass of wine. And I looked at the list, and I was kind of, I was just not, the wine selection was just not, let's just say there's nothing that I really wanted to drink there for the wines. And I turned to somebody else who was with me, another well-known bartender, and I said, hey, you know what, there's this wine list, it's not that great. And they said, well, nobody comes here for the wine, they come for the cocktails. And I thought, interesting philosophy. I didn't quite agree with that. I didn't agree with it at all. But just to give you an idea of kind of the mindset that was happening at that time. And since then, I've been around to so many bars, always looking for that great glass of wine. And honestly, it's eluded me a lot of times. So that's why we're talking about, today we're talking about why wine matters. So let's just kick it off with Tim. Bulletin Place was on the world's 50 best bars list, 5 times, and Australian Bar of the Year 4 times. And your other establishment, Dead Bringer, specializes in only Australian wines from independent producers, right?
Yeah, exactly right. I guess we have, both sort of across both venues, we've got a general kind of rule that we really only stock exclusively Australian wines that support small boutique producers. There's a big focus on sustainability in the vineyard, minimal intervention. We try to reduce our sort of footprint to the environment, and we try to really celebrate Australia's biodiversity and terroir as much as possible with our lists.
So when you were writing these lists for these bars, was wine on your mind? Was it top of mind at the beginning? Is it something that came over time? What was your rationale at the beginning there?
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, I have to sort of give a shout out to our respective managers in both venues that do actually look after our wine lists. We obviously oversee it as owners, but it'd be remiss of me not to thank the actual staff that put these lists together. Sort of most notably a woman by the name of Sally Giles, who looks after our lists across both venues holistically. Ultimately, when we think about, I'll take a step back and talk about Australia as a nation and their sort of drinking culture. We are, I guess, stereotypically sort of thought of as big beer drinking, culture, but realistically, we're a really huge wine drinking country, and that's been so since about the 70s. We've really been able to democratize wine. The Stelvin screw top was an Australian invention. The Goon Sack by Thomas Angove, another Australian invention, or otherwise known as a bag in box or cask wine. So, although we've always drank a lot of Australian wine, there's always been a bit of a connection to it, to a quality that's not up to par as our sort of European counterparts. But that's really changed in the last 20 years, I dare say, with a lot more sort of independent and natural winemakers coming to the fore. So we try to celebrate that as much as we do our cocktail list and obviously our beer list as well.
Oh, great. So Carina, you're from you're doing business in a small little wine growing country, like France. I don't know. They put out a few cases here and there, right? So at your bars, Candelaria, world's 50 best list 6 times in a row. And the Matters Dahling was on the world's 50 best, top 100. Tales of the Cocktail finalist for best restaurant bar. So tell me your philosophy. How did that start out for you? I mean,
so I mean, for us, the hard part, it's a very different story. It's a very different market. Wine is a must in a way, definitely today more than ever. Before, when cocktails were just, there was a reinvention of cocktails. There was a new beginning for cocktails in the city of Paris in around 2006, 2007. Around that time, I would say cocktail bars that started emerging had some wine, but very little. And the reason why is because we wanted French people to drink cocktails. So there was a particular choice for cocktail bars to don't carry wine, just trying to really make Parisians kind of drink cocktails, because that was the challenge in our market at that time. Today, that market has changed. Like, cocktails are definitely more present. There's tons of concepts in different cocktail bars. And now today, we don't talk about that anymore. So there's definitely, again, room for wine. In our story, when we opened Candelaria is a very, very small venue, and being with food that is Mexican, traditional Mexican cuisine. We have our tacos, that is a 12-seat small taqueria. We sell mainly our frozen margarita and beer, micheladas, aguas frescas, things that are more typical of the cuisine. We do not carry wine in the taqueria, and we don't carry like a California or Mexican wine. Well, we could have, but it's not a place where you will enjoy actually a glass of wine. And then in the cocktail bar in the back, we have focus on cocktails and beer. So Candelaria doesn't carry any wine, and it was a very particular choice because of the concept itself, and because we wanted people to drink cocktails. That was our challenge 10 years ago. And what we actually did 8 years ago is we opened Le Marie Celeste, that is 2 minutes walking from Candelaria. And there, because of the concept itself, we wanted something when we open. And the venue is bigger, it's more open indeed, physical, like the space it is. And we have a bar with 20 seats, and there we do carry wine. And wine is not an afterthought, it's actually as important as the food and the cocktails. So the venue was built to have this offer. So today at the Marie Celeste, we do focus on natural wine. We have a list that is 75% French, but we do have Austria, Georgia, Spain, Italy, Germany as other countries for wine. We are quite lucky with what we can get in France, for sure, for incredible wines. And we have thought, I mean, for our teams, and like, well, we're going to talk about training and everything, but we have always made this a priority to really invest yourself in the wine program as much as you want to know about the food and the cocktails, etc. So there were around 200 references of wine in the menu.
So I'm just going to disagree with one thing you said earlier. You said you wouldn't enjoy wine in your taqueria. I can enjoy drinking wine anywhere. So let me just put that out there right now.
Yeah, I know. I knew you will get back to me on that. Candelaria today could have wine. Yeah. We just have not decided to have any until now. It's just not been, I don't even know if people has ever asked us for wine there. You know, it's such a specific concept when you arrive there. It was already 10 years ago, something so new and different in the way it looked and it felt, that people already felt they were going to something very new for them. So they didn't felt in this, I'm talking also about my public, you know, that felt very comfort and familiar with wine. That's it, and we ordered a glass of wine automatically.
Well, let me just stop you right there, because I actually want to know, for those people, you know, those bar owners, bartenders who really don't know that much about wine, and maybe that's why they haven't investigated putting wine on their list. Like, how did you learn, Tim? Like, what was your introduction to wine? Had you been drinking it?
Yeah, I mean, so just to sort of just on Carina's point, I think you both had sort of valuable points. I mean, obviously you can enjoy wine anywhere, but for Carina, it was about the concept and really sort of fulfilling that and letting guests be transported to a region and a cuisine and a concept and I guess that's the biggest sort of shortcoming of a lot of bars and bartenders and cocktail bars is that we have this amazing concept that we want to transport people into these these amazing pieces of artwork that we put in a glass, and then we talk about we have this myopic focus on things like we got this gin from this producer that's 100 kilometers up the road, and they use jasmine from this garden, or we use produce from this market, and we talk so much about our sort of regionality and seasonality. Yet when it comes to wine, they'll just have a supermarket Shiraz from the Barossa Valley that costs $10 in a big supermarket chain, and they don't think about the wine side of things. So for Carina, and it's about sort of like fulfilling that concept. And I guess for a good bar, not just a cocktail bar, it's about fulfilling the concept over beer, wine, and your cocktail list as well. And that is what's transportive. When it comes to sort of my sort of wine education, I've done no official training. It's a real learn on the job kind of way of going about it. As much as wine training, I think is absolutely excellent. I think a lot of the time wine training just helps you with the language around wine and talking about the adjectives and talking about what you're actually experiencing. The best way to learn about wine is to drink a lot of it, and is to taste a lot of it and to challenge yourself. And I'm not talking about consumption of liters and liters of wine. I'm just talking about trying new things, having that opportunity that when you see a wine varietal that you've never tried or never heard of before, pick it up, buy that bottle, have a glass of it, and then straight away Google where it's from, what it typically should taste like, and all of its qualities. And that's the best way to learn. And you start building this encyclopedia of knowledge in your head, and it's the best way of learning as well, because you're viscerally tasting and smelling it.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I always joke, and I always say that I drink a lot of wine, and I actually really do. But I subscribe to the Francesco Lafrancone's philosophy. We're not drinking, we're learning. Well, sometimes I am drinking, but most of the time I am learning as well. And absolutely, but I completely agree with you. And I actually have a little bit of wine background. I did the Court of Masters. I've done a level 1 there. The WSET, I've done a level 2 in wine. And I have, I read a lot about wine. And so for me, there is a lot of research that I've done that's gone into informing my choices as well. But again, not everybody has the time to do that, right? So, I mean, Carina, how did you get started with wine? And furthermore, how do you suggest for other people who don't really have the time? Is there a quick route to learning about wine?
I mean, it depends on how much you want to know, but there's not really a quick route. I mean, it's like anything. When we start working in this industry, I mean, I didn't know anything about, not even coffee, and I come from a coffee product country. I didn't know much about beer. I didn't know anything about mezcal or tequila or whiskey. Like all these things, I really learned by working the product, by tasting, by investigating, by buying books, by finding mentors, by really is definitely finding elements around you that can help you to grow in your learning process. And then when you're part of hospitality, I mean, we are obligated to learn our topics. Like you cannot be a hospital person and pretend to have teams and pretend to have people that work with you in your places if you don't transmit this desire of learning. And you cannot give good hospitality if you don't know your product. So that's probably also, like, wine cannot be an afterthought. It cannot. Like, actually nothing in your venue should be, but wine requires certain elements. Like, it requires glassware. It requires a place where you can keep your wine at a decent temperature. It requires it's seasonal as well. Like on summer, you don't drink the same type of wines that on winter. If you have food, it needs to kind of make sense with the food you have. Like wine is a very special, it has his own identity, and it's a very special category that requires a lot of attention. So
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, and to jump in, so I'm so sorry to jump in, but I was going to say, and if you don't have the time to do that, there's a lot of amazing independent distributors and market to market that can help you do that. So as a sort of big takeaway, if you don't have the time or the focus or the energy or the education, then handball that to somebody else. And there'll be so many distributors that do have good wine portfolios that can help you build that list seasonally and train.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to mention that too. Use your sales rep. You know, that's what they're there for. Ask them to bring you samples, you know, ask them for all of those, you know, all the PDFs, all the leaflets, all the information that they have at their disposal, that they'd be more than happy to pass on to you and your staff. Absolutely. And yeah, further to your point, Carina, wine can be tricky because it's not like a spirit that in most cases is the same every year, right? Bottling after bottling, it looks the same, it tastes the same. Wine, we're talking about grapes, we're talking about crops variation that is at the mercy of, for one thing, climate, and so many other factors. And it changes from vintage to vintage. So, and that's something that can be daunting for people. You know, when I bought that 2018 and now the 2019, I have to take it off the list. So yes, you do have to maintain and keep up. But for me, that's part of the fun. You know, that leads back into the tasting, back into learning more, and back into the experimentation, right? So, all right, so we've decided that we're going to put wine on the list, right? We're going to take it seriously. We're going to learn a little bit about it. We've spoken to our reps. So now, how do we choose which wines are going on the list? Like, what factors affect that? Tim, you want to start that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, depending on the style of venue, obviously, it's you know, how many wines you store and how it's stored, and how many by the glass even is a huge decision. For example, at Bulletin Place, we decided when we opened, you know, wine certainly was never going to be an afterthought, just because of the amount of wine that we loved and consumed. Although we did open as a cocktail bar, we decided we wanted to have wines certainly available. So we decided we were going to change the wine list daily, and we were going to open up 2 reds, 2 whites, 1 rosé, 1 sparkling. So at any point there'd be 6 wines open, and those wines would ultimately be chosen by the first customers of the day. They would look at our wine list of you know, 10 reds, 10 whites, a couple of naturals, a couple of rosés, a couple of sparklings. They would choose that bottle, and then we would pour that bottle until it was finished, and then we would either reopen it or we'd let a customer choose a different bottle. So at any one point, we'd only ever have a couple of bottles open, but that wine list changed, you know, not just daily, but throughout the night. So for us, that was a way of really minimizing waste. It was an opportunity to put the decision making in the customer's hands and give them an element of control and freedom. And obviously, all of the rest of the wines were always available by the bottle. So we always had options. If people didn't want to drink one of the wines by the glass, we could always try to bend their arm into choosing a wine by the bottle. When it comes to a restaurant, you've got to do a little bit differently. With Dead Ringer, one of the biggest sort of contributing factors was we needed to sort of choose wine by price as well. There's certainly a window of spending that customers sort of expect within our venue, and obviously margin as well. So ultimately, when we choose our wine list, we're going to our distributors with certain parameters, like we need 4 lighter style red wines for the summer months with a wholesale price between $11 and $17. And then we'd open that up to tender to all of our distributors, and then we'd do tastings that way. So we would build a list around price and around style, and then we would open up those options to tender, and then have our distributors come in, and then we would do a day of tasting, and then we'd finalize it.
Well, why wasn't I drinking there? I would have chosen all the bottles. Yes, let's open that one. Now let's open this one. What a great idea. Carina, what about you? How do we put that list together from your end?
So, for example, At Marie Celeste, the list it's been growing organically through the years, of course. We didn't open with 200 references. It's been really through the time and the work it has been done there. Josh, my business partner, he is the wine savvy of the group, and he's the one that is really been purchasing and being in contact with the vignerons or with the distributors to get certain allocations and things like that. Because here there's also a lot of competition in allocations and what you can get for wine, mainly in natural wine when the quantities are small. So it's the way we have built our menu. It's been by the glass. We have always had between three glasses, 3 reds, 3 whites, rosé for summer. For summer, we also have a very specific, like the reds change. Of course, we have a more lighter profile, more in the fruit side, also younger wines. Maybe in the whites, depending on the seafood we're serving, because Marie Celeste serves a lot of seafood, we can have more richer whites, something a little more buttery or even more mineral as well. So depending, so those we choose really by characteristics when we can get. Price is an issue because here people would not pay more than 6 or 7 euros a glass of wine. So we need to be very careful on the wines we serve by the glass and the margins we can play on it. And then yes, we have 1 bubbles, like always we have 1 glass of champagne. And then maybe like during summer, we will propose pet nat, for example, like just for fun, for the aperitif time. We will have different other bubbles to propose. So that's kind of how we choose. But Marie Celeste being a wine focused place, at Hero, for example, that is our Korean restaurant, we have wine, but it's a very smaller list. We have 10 references. And there, because we sell quite evenly with beer and cocktails, we have more appellations that people know. So we work more, we were going to have a Sancerre and a Chablis or a Saint-Emilion, and they're like something that people are familiar with, that is not too challenging for them when they're gonna sell, and also for the staff that works there to be something more easier for them to learn and to taste and be able to sell. So at Hero, because of the style of food is quite specific, it doesn't really change much besides the vegetables when it's seasonal. It's still it's spicy food, so the profile of the wines need to go on that line. And we have cocktails and beers, and it needs to be like a marriage between all those elements. But we do choose a product that is easy, let's put it like that, for staff and the guest to understand and to go for.
Right. That makes sense. I think you do have to have that kind of compromise. I mean, you're both working with places that have food. So what about if the food is not an emphasis, like for instance, in certain cocktail bars? I mean, do you need to go with a Chardonnay or a Pinot Noir, things that people will recognize there?
I think you can. I think you certainly need to be a little less challenging if guests are in a cocktail bar and they're deciding to have a palate refresher because they want something in between cocktails. Then I think you need to sort of in certain situations lean on the usual suspects and not try to surprise people or challenge people too much. And that's obviously venue to venue, and it's bar team to bar team, because if you've got a highly educated and persuasive bar team and you stock really sort of delicious but unusual wines, then the job is simple to get people to enjoy them, because there's charm and there's that sense of hospitality pushing them. We try to sort of dance on the fence with both venues. We really try to have something that's unintimidating and easy for guests to be able to navigate in terms of our wine list. But then we also have certain wines that are certainly curveballs. I think if you're putting wines by the glass, then you ultimately need to choose wines that are easy to approach and easy for consumers to enjoy. Obviously, when it comes to food, you obviously step up the tannin, step up the minerality a lot more, because you will be bouncing it off certain dishes. But when you're choosing wines that are just to sort of have without food, then they need to be a little bit more sort of balanced and potentially delicate.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree with all of that. I mean, I was running a bar a few years ago where I did all the cocktails and chose the wine, and I was kind of lucky because it was downstairs. It was in the basement of a restaurant. So I was able to lean on the restaurant's wine selections. I still selected my own, but I could pull from them a little bit here and there, but I purposely chose not to have anything like Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay. And it did take a little extra effort with the staff to explain to them how to convey to guests that, all right, this is not that, but it is this, and you'll like it because of these reasons. You know, so again, it's a little bit more effort, but for me, it was worth it, and it's something I wanted to do. But again, it's really, like you said, up to the venue, you know, up to you, and depending on exactly what kind of framework you're working within. So, all right, let's get down to it right now. Let's talk about—
Frankie, so just to jump in, you raised a really interesting point trying to get staff on board. And, you know, there's a couple of real ways that you can really get staff invested in your wine program. You know, one of the ways is to potentially open a different bottle every night after work. So instead of just reaching for that, you know, for that bottle of lager after work or that shot of rye whiskey, actually making it an educational piece and opening a bottle of wine for your staff, a different bottle of wine each night for you all to enjoy and to have a think about. You might sit there tired and not say a word about it, but at least you're trying new things. And then the other thing is to open up your wine list for your staff to be able to purchase from the venue at cost price. And this takes a little bit of work to sort of get it set up. And some venues are good at it and some venues are not. But I want your staff to be trying as many wines on your list as you can. So allowing them to be able to buy wine at wholesale price is a really important way to get them on board.
And share your tastings as well. When you have you have your distributor that has something to make you try, book all your tastings on a day that, for example, you're going to have your bar meeting. This bar meeting is going to be essentially, we're going to taste some wine and try to get everybody indeed excited. Something we do as well is we tell them to pick 5 bottles that they are curious or interested about, and we introduce them to these wines. If they sell a bottle, we give them a bottle. So it's kind of like a game as well of like, oh my God, this is a challenge. We have some bottles of wine that can be a little bit expensive, and we want to sell them. So to try to sell a 90, 80-euro bottle of wine is always this challenge of who's going to make it. And we give you a bottle as well. Well, depending on the quantities, or we give you we propose it, as you say, like as a staff bottle after dinner or something. Whoever, like, you have to make it playful because it is a lot of information, and you cannot expect. I mean, I cannot expect a bartender or even a front of the house to learn a 200 bottle reference wine. Like, that's not wine list. Not possible.
All I can say is, why have I never worked for either of you before? How many times I have sat there wishing that somebody would offer me a glass of wine, but that was usually never part of the shift drink.
Well, you're only 26 hours of flying away from us, Frankie. It's not too late. It's all good.
To be fair, I will say there were a couple of places when I worked at Monkey Bar with Belinda Chang. She was always really great at opening that bottle and having. You taste it. That's where I tasted my first Special Club champagne and things like that. So it does happen, but honestly, not that often. But I love that idea of letting the staff buy at wholesale cost. Is everyone listening? All you owners, operators, bar directors out there, let it happen. Let it be so. All right. So all right, let's talk about pricing. And I'd like to, I noticed that on Dead Ringers by the Glass menu, it's in the American prices, you're averaging between $10 and $16 in there. And I think there was one wine that was a little bit more than that, a special wine. And Carina, like you said, at Mary Celeste, you're around $8 to $10 US with you've got one special at $19 dollars. So yeah, how you're keeping prices really, really affordable, which honestly, I feel like that happens everywhere but New York. This is a very special place, and maybe not San Francisco either. But so yeah, how do we determine pricing now?
So ultimately, when I sort of lived and worked in the UK, there was a certain sort of like pricing model you'd need to meet. You need to make a 75% gross profit margin on your drinks. You need to keep your staff costs under 25%. You would need to have your rent of your venue under 10%. There's a certain kind of rules that you'd need to have to ultimately own a profitable business. In Australia, it's a little bit different. We've got much higher wages, which is a great thing. It means that obviously bartending is not just a trade now; it's a profession, and bartenders are able to live really, really comfortable lives, without having to rely on gratuities and tips. So what that ultimately means for the consumer is that we need to charge ultimately a little bit less for our food. So our food's really approachable, and our wine is probably a little bit expensive. And alcohol prices in Australia, are expensive, and we unfortunately can't do what you do in America and just blindly pour wine into a glass until you count to 10 or something like that. We do really have to keep it tight. So I dare say that the wine and alcohol prices in general in Australia are as high as anywhere in the world, but we try to offset that with making eating out really affordable. So we're trying to get people to come into our venues and eat 2-3 times a week, and then hopefully enjoy 1 or 2 glasses of wine, or maybe 5 or 6 glasses of wine on the weekend. But yeah, we have to keep things fairly tight. So our alcohol GP in Australia is generally around 75 to 77% of our gross profit margin.
Okay, so your alcohol GP.
Yeah, so our GP would, if we say it's 75%, ultimately what that means, if a wine costs us $10, we would need to charge times 4, but then we would need to add 10% because that's a GST. So we would need to charge $44 to make our 75% GP on that. 10% of anything we sell goes straight to the government in a goods and services tax. So that's automatically sort of added and then reduced. So our profit margin is just 4 times the price plus 10%.
Okay, great. And what about you, Carina? How does pricing work for you?
Quite similar. We also have very high salaries, and here the social system, the taxes that you get for employment are really high. Plus the fact that you can't fire people really in France. Everybody gets 5 weeks paid vacation, they have full health insurance. All these things are really good. Again, I joined team. This create a proper profession. It doesn't tire people, and yeah, people take seriously their jobs, and hopefully have also a more healthy lifestyle. So yeah, so because of that, we need to be very careful on our margins. And for wine, we actually do almost exactly the same. Is the difference we do have is we have a public that is used to pay very cheap their glasses of wine. So we do play sometimes, like what you said, we can have one very expensive, a special glass of wine. That's something new we kind of started recently. We have now a song in sight, a young woman that is been playing around with seeing what we can get. And it's true that during summer we do get more tourism, like definitely this summer. It's been a difference, and people want to try some certain wines, and they don't want to spend a lot of money on a bottle, but they will love one glass of that bottle. So we have been playing on things like that sometimes, but in very expensive wine, you actually don't make much more money. It's really more a luxury, or it's more a pleasure to actually be able to have those allocations and to have those beautiful bottles, but you don't make much on it when you sell the bottle. Yeah, sorry?
I was just going to add, also one of the great things that Carina has going for her is, as the owner of venues that stock 75% French wine. I mean, as someone, I lived in France in 2010, and I was astounded at the quality of wine I could get for a very, very cheap price, even in a Carrefour supermarket. In a place like Australia where we produce a lot of wine, and we have a wine list that's solely Australian, our wines at that similar price to the French equivalent just aren't up to the same quality. So we need to spend probably a little bit more on our wines to have a similar quality. Hence, the cost of our wines by the glass is considerably more than Carina's venues. But geez, I tell you what,
we're completely spoiled with wine for sure.
Yeah, I tell you what, you get for €5 in a supermarket, you can get some pretty damn good wine in France.
So you will understand why people don't want to pay over €6 or €7 a glass of wine.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's also a challenge, and that happens as well in cocktail bars. Like for example, on a place like Candelaria, one of the reasons we didn't want to have also wine is because it's such a small venue, and we have very little seats. So if you have somebody spending €12 on a cocktail, but then somebody spending just €6 on a wine, your numbers just don't add up, and you need to pay your staff, and you need to pay your rent, and you need to pay, and all these things are really high. So you could probably sell wine in the taqueria, indeed, but over there I don't have space to have it properly. Like I really don't. It's not a venue that will make that a client having a good time in that moment. You know, it's not that enjoyable. So yeah, that was also part of a choice why in this place we don't have any. I don't say that's the right thing to do, of course not. I join you completely. In sometimes you just want a glass of wine, and to don't find it in a cocktail bar can be really frustrating. But in our case, in that specific venue, is very coherent with everything that it's around. But also, like price-wise, it does play in your ecosystem of what you need to pay and then you need to go through. So at Marie Celeste, it makes a lot of sense, and that's the way we work it out. But at Candelaria, we wouldn't be able to match our numbers.
Okay, so I'm spending all my time in Marie Celeste and not in Candelaria. That's
You actually spend a fair amount of time in Marie Celeste.
Made it clear. But well, in New York, it's a little bit different, as I was saying, in that people, I feel here, are used to paying. I mean, don't like it, but are used to paying quite a premium on wines by the glass. You know, I mean, there's a lot of places that do that, what I call the dreaded 5-ounce pour. So you're getting the, you know, it brings tears to my eyes even to think about it. But you're getting 5 ounces, and it's really hard to find a wine by the glass on a list for under $12. It's probably going to be more like 13 or 14. And I'm the type of person, I look at that list and I'm always going to get the cheapest wine. Why? Because I think if it's on your list in the first place, it should be good and I shouldn't have to spend more. So if you're putting something on at $12 or $13, show me what you got. You know, and it's interesting because I've had people who, you know, work at the place try to talk me out of that cheaper wine. And I think I'm saying, why? If it's there, why can't I have it? So there's that. But the average kind of markup that I've seen here is like that 4 times the wholesale price to start. But again, many places charge a lot more than that. So because real estate.
You're gonna hate it in Australia. We pour some restaurants will be pouring 4 ounces and most bars are around 5 ounces. We do 1 ounce for spirits. But with all that said, I think it's crazy that through the US and Europe and Australia, you know, we all generally go for that, you know, bottle price times 4, and it all kind of works out in the wash. There must be something going on. I don't think Australian venue owners are splashing the cash around and much more sort of affluent than our American or European counterparts. So it's weird how it all evens out.
And there's the issue of tariffs also, which have been huge here. I mean, you know, the price on a lot of French wines and certain German wines, certain European wines have gone up about 25%. So that's been a big drawback as well for wine. But so let's talk about menu placement, and we're going to pull up both of your menus one at a time. We'll start with Tim. We'll start with the Dead Ringer menu, so people can see how you've laid it out. And is there a rhyme or reason to that? How did you choose, you know, the order? Does it matter at all?
We with our cocktails, our beers, and our wines, we generally list them in pallet weight. There's a general kind of there's a general kind of sectioning of sparkling through to fortified that we generally keep to. We've just come out of our winter here in Australia, so our fortified is a sweet fortified wine. It's not like a drier style sherry or a mistel or something like that. It is a vintage port. All of our wines are, as I sort of mentioned before, Australian. We really just try to lean on as much as possible independent boutique producers. There's obviously the huge rise of natural wine in Australia, much like everywhere else in the world. So our guests are looking to experiment a bit more. They're looking for a little bit more sort of character and skin contact with their wine. So we're able to experiment in that regard as well. With that said, there's some really sort of usual suspects in there as well. We've got an amazing Blanc de Blanc sparkling wine from a producer in Rylstone in New South Wales, and it's actually from a French couple that had been growing wine up near Champagne. And they'd found they'd been looking for ages for this little pocket of land which they could do what they were doing in France, and they managed to find it in Rylstone of all places, which is quite a weird place to sort of get wine. So we've got we've got sort of wines that reference champagne in our sparkling wine section, but we, as I sort of said, we really heavily lean on Australian, and then by the sort of glass, we keep it all in palate weight.
So, but what kind of, so I'm looking at the list here now. What order are these in? Are they in, they're not in order of price?
No. So, I mean, I think when it comes to price, I mean, you're always going to have couples on their first dates, and the go-to is always going to be the second cheapest, right? You want something safe and you want something second cheapest. So we generally, it's a little bit cheeky and it's a little bit of a restaurant tip, is our second cheapest wine, generally speaking, is our wine with the biggest profit margin. It's kind of the wine where you're not committing to anything too pricey, but generally speaking, you're not also choosing the cheapest wine. So we make our best margin on that wine, and we really try to focus that. As I sort of said, the wines are listed in palate weight. We don't list them in order of price. We don't think price should be the sort of the dictating factor. You should be necessarily putting your wines in order. Ultimately, it makes little sense. And we wanted to really just be able to hand over our wine list to our guests and let them sort of take ownership, just under the sort of education that, hey, heavier wines are at the bottom and lighter styles are at the top if you're a little bit unsure.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then, okay, great. And then Carina, what about yours, your menu here?
Well, the menu we have right now, it's because of the COVID rules, it's a QR code. It's not anymore our nice book that you can go through pages and have a very different experience. So the way we did it was actually the most simple possible when people navigate on their cell phone. And we have it on categories, as we have the bubbles. Then we have rosés, we have reds, whites, and it's all the regions and basically everything we work with. We do have a reserve list that will be our somm or the person in charge of the wine of the night that will come and drive through it. But there's no particular order. There's no order of price either. It's actually probably something since the beginning, since we opened Marisela, we said we didn't want to have. I think it's good. And it's actually, what's interesting is what you said about having a cheap wine in the menu. Like every wine you have in the menu has a reason for its existence. And if you choose it and it's coherent, it should be good. You shouldn't be just drive by the price. So when you have a list that is all organized in that way, it makes also people feel uncomfortable when you are on a date or something. It's just not like the best to just go to the first wine because it's the cheapest. So here you that's not what we're trying to do. We play a little bit more with organize it by the grapes. So you will have like all the different gamets. Generally, new entries of wine go first, and they start going down afterwards. But there's no particular order on the grapes itself. There's just the big groups for people to navigate quite easier. Of course, we have the vintages, but they're not also in the same order. It's more a new entry will definitely come at the beginning, and everything will start just going down.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I personally like to put the wines by body, because I think that, like Tim was saying, like I think that can be very helpful, when possible. And also, I like to note, and I didn't do this on my last menu, but now it makes a big difference for me. But I like to note the ABV of wines as well, because I've noticed that I don't like to drink anything above 14%. As a matter of fact, I like to keep it 13 and under. So that's something I'm always conscious of. So if I know that, I like to know that. And we see that a lot more with beer these days. You see beer lists with the ABV. So that's something so that's something that I would like to see more of.
I think it's great. I think it's really great to call out if there's obviously some really nice exceptions. I mean, traditionally, obviously Moscato is a lighter alcohol wine. Moscato's got a bad name, but I actually quite like it at times. So Moscatos that can be sort of lower in ABV, I think it's great to sort of call out, and they're great for people that are driving or don't want to drink a lot of alcohol that day.
Oh yeah, and especially now, again, with climate change, I mean, there's so many wines that are just bigger, they're just higher in alcohol from places you wouldn't imagine. I saw a Loire Valley that was at 14% the other day in the store, and you know.
Yeah.
So
I had a Barossa Shiraz the other day that was 16. It was nuts. It was like rocket fuel.
Yeah,
I was gonna put it in my motorbike.
Right. You know, people should know about that. So, all right. So what about practical things? Like, all right, we're not going to sell a whole bottle every night, you know, unless I'm there and I'm just going to drink the rest of what's left over. But so what about storage? What about, you know, like any tips on serving wine, for instance, and storing it?
Yeah. After you, Carina, by all means.
So, but one of the thing actually, when you choose your wine by the glass, is trying to keep more, when you work with natural wines, for example, trying to keep something that lasts at least 3 hours open. That's quite one of the things you definitely need to think when you're having wine by the glass, something that will stay. Definitely be very careful with bubbles. Champagne will stay a couple of days open, not I mean, maybe a cava, but not a prosecco, definitely not a pennat. The way, so when you do wine by the glass, that's where you can have some wastage, or you will not use the entire bottle. In those cases, we generally try to go through all of it. If it doesn't, Anne-Marie Celeste, a lot, we could work with the wine. We use it for a syrup. We do a homemade vermouth style. We actually work a lot with those wines. We just don't throw it away. With majority of the cocktails that we do have wine in it, and this has been part of the concept since the beginning. And then for storage, I mean, there is the classic things that you always take the oxygen out of your wine, put it on a refrigerator, keep it at a cool temperature. If you have a basement, make sure to keep your wine there. When it's hot season, when it's summertime, be double conscious on those things. During service, if you don't have too much space, keep it on ice. You know, keep it on cold water on ice. If you don't have like a refrigerator where you can put them, be very careful with reds. Reds cannot be too cold. So it's always really trying to match the things, but there's multiple little tricks like that to don't waste. Train your staff to constantly, yes, take the oxygen out, try to keep it, you know, clean. And yes, choose your wine by the glass that are the ones that can last the best, that can last the entire night.
Tim, do you have thoughts?
I mean, serving, yeah. I mean, absolutely everything that Carina said. It's an interesting point. I mean, Australia is, it's very typical. Obviously, generally a very, very, very warm climate. We generally serve our red wines way too hot, and our white wines way too cold. I've actually initiated a 20-minute rule for any of the wines in the house. If it's a red wine, we put it in the fridge for 20 minutes before serving, and if it's a white wine, we take it out of the fridge 20 minutes before serving. And for drinking at home, that's generally a pretty good rule. But certainly in venues, we keep our red wines just sitting on top of a dedicated sort of ice bucket. We don't stick it in, but just to sort of take the heat off it. And then if the white wines are super cold, if it's something really delicate and perfuming like a Chardonnay, then we you don't need to have it at one degree from the fridge. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think temperature is definitely not to be understated. I mean, I think the best, or the average, is kind of between 10 and 15 Celsius. 50 to 59 Fahrenheit, something like that, for wines. And of course, you could go a little bit higher, but I think generally that's a good framework to work within. And yeah, definitely overnight, the reds and the whites, like just chill them, just because they'll be great if you don't. And obviously keep them away from light as well, because light will affect your wines and the quality. What about the Corbin? Have either of you used that? And for those of you who don't know,
I was just about to say,
right.
I was just about to say, if you've got a generous owner.
Right. So just for those of you who don't know, a Corbin is a little contraption that it almost looks like a little microscope, and it has a needle that punches through the foil and the cork of your wine, and you can take out as little or as much as you like, and then it actually pumps some gas into that empty space, and then when you take it out, the cork seals up. That's how it's supposed to work. And it tends to work. There are a lot of people who are very happy with it. And people use that for, say, expensive bottles. When you don't want to open the whole bottle, you can just take out, a little bit and pour someone a half glass, that kind of thing. So that's been, I don't know how many years that's been around, but that's been kind of a boon to this kind of, tasting wines that you could never taste before, because if you couldn't afford to buy the bottle. So have either of you used Corbins, or
Yeah, we're very fortunate in Australia that we didn't buy one for our venue ourselves, but a lot of our independent distributors that are that are selling low margin, high priced wines, the only way for them to get into more venues is to be able to put them on by the glass. So some of our distributors have actually purchased sets of Corbins, and then they lease them out to venues that want to pour their expensive wines by the glass. So we've always got a couple of wines under gas, and it just means that we're able to offer our more expensive wines by the glass without any wastage.
Mm-hmm.
I know. I actually live with somebody that is kind of a brand ambassador for Corbin. Michael, my partner, he adores it as a tool. We use it a lot at home, and he uses it at his places as well. For us, we haven't really adventured ourselves in it. There's been a little bit of coming back on more, because it is a pricey tool. Not everybody really knows how to use it. We used it a little bit for a couple of months at one of our venues at Le Grand Verre at the time. We had a somm that was very experienced on it. We broke the needle, I don't know how many times. It was just never here. It actually became more something that will slow your service as something that will benefit for us. More when we are not really opening expensive, or if we do, like at Marisoles right now, that we're having like one expensive wine, we just go for it. But we haven't really adventured ourselves in it. But it's a chat we're having. It's a work in progress. It's all about training staff and make sure that you can do it properly.
Yeah, that's right. And again, back to training staff and getting everybody on board, everybody on the same page about, again, what the wines are, how to sell them, how to pair them with whatever the guests are eating, and how to, just do things like use the Corbin, right? So what about those people who say, again, back to this is the cocktail bar. I want people drinking my cocktails, not the wine. Again, when I was running this bar, I put a sparkling rosé by the glass, and people would come in. I remember one night, it was a Saturday night, we were getting buried in tickets. There were only two of us behind the bar, sweating and all that. And people are coming up with the menu, and I'd immediately say, we've got this great sparkling rosé by the glass. If you'd like to get started with that, just so you know. And 9 times out of 10, people would go for the sparkling rosé, and it would just be, thank you, just give me a minute to breathe. And and then sometimes they would go back and have a cocktail. Sometimes they wouldn't. But at the end of the day, they were still there. They were still drinking. They were still consuming. They were still paying for a drink.
Have you, Frankie, you're from New York. You've been to Peter Luger's Steakhouse? I'm not sure if you eat meat or not, but you go to Peter Luger. Yeah. You go to Peter Luger's Steakhouse, and they've got all these awards on the wall for the best steak in New York, and it's 28 years in a row, whatever it is. And you sit there and you pay $100 for this piece of meat, and then you order some salads around it. The salads are pathetic. It's literally like a buffalo tomato cut up thick, it looks like it's been cut with a bread knife, and it's awful. And it sits next to some raw onion, and it's like that for me is the equivalent of going into a cocktail bar with a poor wine list. You've done so well. You've come so far to sort of build this concept and create this this drinking center of excellence, and you're let down by not having a few delicious and well thought out wine options. It's almost like it's not necessarily the easy work, but you've come so far and you can't take that final jump. So it's to complement the rest of the list and the rest of the concept. It's not to take over from it from any single way. And that's not taking anything away from the wine or the cocktails. It's elevating everything.
I completely agree. Completely agree with what you just said. I mean, but that is the point. It needs to be very well thought, not a second thought. It needs to be very well chosen and proper. Like, as you said, to don't generate any waste, to make sure you're elevating your program and not downgrading it. And yes, I mean, I think today, definitely in the city I work and we are based on, if we open a cocktail bar, you need to have a proper wine list and a proper wine program for it, 100%.
Amen to that. I mean, you know, like I always say, and like you both said earlier, if you're going to go to all this trouble to source these incredible ingredients and these great bottles and these obscure spirits and everything from all over the world, why not do that also with your wine? You know, Tim, earlier we were talking about, there's also the stories. There's a lot of great stories with these winemakers, you know, I mean, you know, find out those stories and pull your guests in that way, you know. And like I always say too, why give people an excuse to leave when you can give them an excuse to stay? Just stay right there in that chair and just keep drinking down our list, whichever way you'd like to go, right? So and let's have some final thoughts on maybe some resources for people to look to. Like, for instance, I really enjoyed The Wine Bible by Karen McNeil. I think that's a really great book. It's because she's telling stories as well as, you know, talking about all of these great varieties and great wines and great wine regions, maybe Decanter online, that kind of thing. Any resources from the either of you?
I've learned so much from doing online tastings. So generally what I'll do is I'll have a bottle of a particular varietal I've tried before, and then I'll YouTube, you know, a tasting of that particular varietal, and I'll have a professional sommelier, you know, or a professional or a winemaker talk me through that particular varietal. It's a really, really fun way of learning that doesn't involve you sort of going out and purchasing anything else but the wine itself. So I lean on that quite heavily. Is generally speaking, is YouTube videos of professionals that know more than me talking me through particular varietals or styles.
Great, yeah. And what about you, Carina? Anything?
I agree. I mean, there's so many things you can find online, but I have to say there's a book I did fall in love a couple of years ago when it came out, and is the Sommelier Atlas of Taste that I highly recommend from Raj Par. I think it's an incredible wine Bible that is very easy to read, is very complete, it explains amazingly well, and is beautiful.
Fabulous. That's great. So we're about winding up now. I really just want to thank you both for sharing all of these insights. I learned a lot, and I hope that our audience did as well. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, like we said, you know, we're bar professionals, we are educators, we are bartenders, we're owners and operators, and, you know, liquids are a big part of our lives. So why not just, you know, learn as much as we can about all the liquids, right? And wine just happens to be a big part of that, right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah. If you have any final thoughts, I'll give you the last words.
I would just say, please experiment. I mean, bartenders, I mean, it's you know, take that opportunity instead of, you know, I think in this industry, we have so many thoughtless drinks in our lives, and it could be that shot of rye after a busy shift, or it could be that, you know, that bottle of Budweiser after a shift. And there's a time and a place for all those things, but, you know, sometimes I think you should sort of challenge yourself and have a glass of wine instead. So crack open a bottle and get stuck in.
And
Agreed.
challenge your team, challenge your bar manager, challenge the owners of the place, you know. Like, if you're really hungry for it, if you work on a place that cares about product, they will give you the knowledge. Like, challenge also your co-workers. I think when people ask me for things, or they ask me for knowledge, is the moment I get the most excited, and I'm like, take all. And
Yes.
and I think that's also been part of curious and passionate in the industry.
Right. And one thing I will add too, this is something that a lot of wine people do, are tasting groups, you know, where everyone gets together and maybe brings one bottle of wine. That way you can taste around, you know, you save a little bit of money, and that's a great way to learn as well. So at the end of the day, just remember that wine matters. I had to throw it in. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you again for attending. Thank you so much to Carina Soto Velasquez. Thank you so much to Tim Philips-Johansson. And thank you to Tales, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.